Lottery. It's a form of gambling. You can buy a ticket easily just by going to your nearest gas station or convenience store. They're as cheap as $1, and the average lottery spending in America is $70 billion per year. The way the game works is once you have your ticket, you choose a set of numbers based on a certain range of numbers from the lottery you are joining to. Then you will select what you hope to be the winning numbers. Or you can get what's called a quick pick. Quick picks are lottery tickets that have random numbers selected for you by a computer rather than having you selecting them yourself. If the numbers you chose end up matching the winning numbers, then you have won the jackpot. There are also scratch tickets, and there are many different kinds, but the game is to scratch the printed area to reveal whether you have won the game or not. If you happen to be a winner, you can collect your money. You could either receive the money all in one payment or receive annual payments. Depending on the amount you won, you can live your life in luxury for a few years or for the remainder of your life, depending on how old you are and how much you have won. But that's not always the case. Some lottery winners aren't always so lucky. Some go bankrupt after spending all of their money and end up going back into the same position they were in before they had won their prize. Worse, some lottery winners would lose their lives either from their own hands or from the hands of others. Urooj Khan was a 46-year-old man from India who moved into Chicago, Illinois in the late 80s. He was said to be a very hardworking person and liked by many people. He owned a string of dry cleaners and real estate. He was married for 12 years, lived in a nice home in the north of Chicago, and had a 17-year-old daughter from his first marriage. He was living a great life, but he just had one problem. He was addicted to scratch-off lottery tickets, and he would buy a lot of them. In one instance, he spent up to $600 in one day in just scratch tickets alone, and sometimes he would end up winning hundreds, even thousands. But in June of 2012, Urooj bought 2 scratch tickets. The first ticket was no winner, but when he got to the second ticket, that's when he had hit the jackpot. He won $1 million. Friends of his said that he was excited about claiming his money because of the number of good deeds he could do with it. But a month later, before he could even see a penny of his winnings, Urooj suddenly died. In July of 2012, Urooj was eating his dinner that his wife made him. Less than an hour later, he went straight to bed, and suddenly, his wife wakes up to him screaming in agony. She calls 911 and was suddenly rushed to the nearest hospital, but it was too late. Urooj Khan was pronounced dead. The doctor has said that he died of natural causes, but a week later, the Cook County Medical Examiner's office got a call from his nephew requesting for them to do more tests on him. His body was exhumed and they did more tests. This time, authorities found a lethal amount of cyanide in his blood, turning the case into a homicide investigation. His nephew said that he believed someone had to kill him once he and the rest of the family were told of the amount of cyanide that was in his blood. His brother filed a petition to a judge asking Citibank to release information about Khan's assets to ultimately ensure that Urooj's daughter receives her fair share of the lotto money. His siblings had pursued legal action to protect their niece's share of her late father's estate. Urooj didn't have a will, His 32-year-old wife Shabana Ansari got an attorney and was questioned by authorities and said she had nothing to do with her husband's death. His brother and sister had won a court order to freeze the lottery winnings after his wife cashed a check in July. She got a total of $425,000. The check was issued on July 19th by the Illinois Comptroller's Office, then mailed. The spokesman for the Comptroller's Office said that it was cashed on August 15th, but he didn't know who cashed it. The judge had then approved Shabana a competing claim as an administrator of the estate. His siblings had questioned if the two were even legally married, but Shabana's attorney said that she does have a marriage certificate from India and that it's valid here in the US. When ABC News had asked her what she thinks about Urooj's siblings questioning their marriage status, all she said was that she didn't care what they had to say. She says she misses her husband and thinks about him every day. However, she declined to comment on anything relating to her cashing the check. She denied removing any of the assets. Authorities were also suspicious to Urooj's father-in-law and wanted to talk to him. The reasoning for their suspicion is that he owed more than $120,000 in back taxes at the time of Urooj's death. However, just like Urooj's wife, his father-in-law also declined that he played any role in his stepson's death. His sister was granted guardianship of her brother's 17-year-old daughter. She says every time she looks at her niece, she is reminded of all the good times she had with her brother. But most importantly, she says she can hear her brother's voice telling her, "How come you're not doing anything about it?" Urooj's siblings have not petitioned to obtain a share of their brother's estate, which is estimated to be $1.2 million in lottery winnings, real estate, laundry business, and automobiles. Eventually, Urooj's estate, including the lottery check, was split between his wife and his daughter. 9 years later, and this case remains unsolved. Detectives continue to talk with family members. It's still an open and active investigation. They said they can't get into specifics as to who they believe to be a suspect. Shabana continues to run the laundry business, and she has said that she hopes God will reveal the truth. Craigory Burch Jr. was a 20-year-old from Fitzgerald, Georgia. He was a small-town forklift operator. One day on November 29, 2015, Craigory would go to H&R Food Mart and purchase himself a quick pick ticket. There, he realized he had won the Georgia lottery. He won $434,000. He was in shock but excited to get his lottery check. The next day, he received it and took this photo. The first thing he did with his money was help buy Christmas presents for people in need. He was a young man with good intentions with his money. But on January 21st, just 2 months after winning the lottery, Craigory was home with his 3 kids and girlfriend, Jasmine Hendricks, when all of a sudden, someone kicked open the front door and 3 masked men entered. 2 of the masked men demanded him to give them the money, while the third went to the back of the home to search for anything valuable. The 2 masked men were aiming at Craigory while he was sitting on the sofa holding his 2-year-old child. He told the masked men, "Don't do it, bro. Don't do it in front of my kids. Please don't do it in front of my kids and old lady." He told them that he was willing to give them his bank card and tossed his pants at them. They received his bank card, and that's when they shot him several times in both legs. One of the men went through Craigory's girlfriend's purse and took her cell phone, wallet, and 2 cell phones that belonged to Craigory. The 3 men ran out of the house and tried to drive off using Craigory's truck, but weren't able to start it. Without any warning, one of the masked men came back inside and shot Craigory in the chest, finally killing the 20-year-old. Craigory's girlfriend ran to a neighbor who was just arriving home. She starts frantically knocking on their car window. She's begging to be let into their car, and seeing her distressed, they unlock their back door and Jasmine gets in. The neighbor asks her what's wrong, and she tells the neighbor, "They just busted in my house and they shot my boyfriend." The neighbor takes Jasmine down the road and dialed 911. Jasmine had both of her kids with her, but then remembers that her other baby was still in the house. That baby was in the back of the house asleep. She goes back to get her third baby, and the neighbor then takes them to a nearby store. It only took 2 months before police got enough tips to find out who the suspects were. In total, 6 people have been arrested in connection with the death of Craigory. The seventh suspect, Nathaniel Baker, was already in jail for an unrelated crime. They're all being charged with several misdemeanors and felonies including malice murder, aggravated assault, armed robbery, possession of a firearm, street gang activity, and home invasion. The police stated what everyone suspected and that this was not a random attack. But in June 2016, Ernest Holcomb managed to escape jail.
Winner. Channel 2's Dave Huddleston is live at the Satellite News Center with how he used the jail's roof to help with his escape. Dave.
Yeah, Aaron, strange story. The Ben Hill County Sheriff told us Ernest Holcomb was in the jail's exercise yard when he slipped out of view. The sheriff says Holcomb made it onto the roof where he stripped out of his pink jumpsuit and somehow escaped. The sheriff says this man, 28-year-old Ernest Holcomb, escaped from the Ben Hill County Jail Wednesday afternoon. He's accused of killing Craigory Burch Jr. The South Georgia father won more than $434,000 playing the Fantasy 5 lottery. Investigators say Holcomb and 6 others broke into Burch's home in Fitzgerald in March, demanded cash, and shot him to death. Burch's girlfriend said he begged for his killers not to shoot him in front of, quote, "my kids and old lady." At the time, the sheriff dedicated significant resources to find his killers.
We've kept these officers on this case around the clock, 7 days a week, till we got it solved. And the people of Fitzgerald can rest assured when we have a crime, we'll devote whatever time it takes to get the job done.
Investigators say Holcomb is 5 feet 9 inches tall and weighs 150 pounds. The sheriff also says there are 40 cameras in the area where Holcomb escaped. He says they're still trying to determine how he got away. Live in the Satellite News Center, Dave Huddleston, Channel 2 Action News.
Luckily though, he was found hiding under a house the next day and returned back to the Ben Hill County Jail. It took an entire year until 4 out of the 7 were in trial. In February 2017, Nathaniel was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. In court, he looked at Craigory's parents and told them that he was truly sorry, but the parents didn't accept his apology. Craigory's father had this to say, "We're talking about a 20-year-old guy, worked since he was 14, had kids, took care of those kids every day. In my honest opinion, I wish they could just go ahead and kill you today, because that's how I feel. Even today, you have no remorse. You're still trying to explain and justify what you did. You killed my son." Nathaniel's defense attorney wants a new trial for Nathaniel as he believes that Nathaniel deserves parole because he cooperated with law enforcement and ran off from the scene before Craigory was even killed. Craigory's father said that he will continue to fight to make sure he never receives parole. The following month in March of that year, Wayne Jordan was found guilty on all counts. He was sentenced to 2 consecutive life sentences plus 15 years for murder, home invasion, and gun charges. His defense attorney tried to appeal to Georgia's Supreme Court, but was rejected. A woman testified that all 7 of them would make jokes about the shooting, and that Wayne would laugh about it as they divided the proceeds from the robbery, which included Craigory's wallet. On June 2017, DeBrantis Overstreet was found guilty on all 14 charges. Evidence was presented that DeBrantis had contacted Wayne and the rest of the suspects planning to rob Craigory. Wayne was hesitant at first, but eventually agreed to participate as he wanted to redeem himself from having stolen drugs earlier from gang members. The court said that the day of the crime, the group drove to Burch's home in 2 separate vehicles. The 2 drivers were DeBrantis and his girlfriend Rosalind. When they arrived at Craigory's home, Nathaniel kicked in the door. DeBrantis and Wayne entered the home pointing their guns at Craigory. Nathaniel was the one who went into the back of the house to search for valuables, while Wayne was the one who stole the cell phones and Jasmine's wallet. The 3 left the house, and when Wayne was unable to start Craigory's truck, DeBrantis went back into the house and was the one who pulled the trigger and killed Craigory. Then all 7 of the gang members left the scene. Rosalind took the stand and said that she did everything because she was afraid of what her boyfriend would do to her if she didn't participate in the crime. She was instructed to do several things that night. She said that DeBrantis called her the night of the crime to pick him and another person up after he killed Craigory. What's picking up her boyfriend? He admits to shooting Craigory 9 times. During the past year, she was receiving love letters by her boyfriend, but in court, she said she took them as threats. She was crying when the defense asked why she never told the truth to the police from the first time when she was questioned by investigators last year in 2016. She started getting emotional and very agitated when a defense attorney was questioning her and her story. She didn't say as to why she lied, but she said she is now telling the truth because, quote, it's the right thing to do. On October 2017, Ernest Holcomb pled guilty on 2 counts of armed robbery, violation of street gang terrorism, and escape from the Ben Hill County Jail. He was sentenced to 20 years for armed robbery, 15 behind bars without parole, 10 years concurrent for gang violation, and 5 years concurrent for the escape. As for the other 3, they are still in jail awaiting a trial date. Billie Bob Harrell Jr. was a 47-year-old man from Texas. He worked at a Home Depot stocking electrical supplies. He had trouble staying at one job as he got laid off from a few jobs in the past few years. This meant that he had a hard time providing for himself, his wife, and his 3 teenage children. The hard times had him fantasize about winning the lottery and how much that could help him and his family. He spent most of his days at church and thought one day he could become a preacher. But besides going to church, he loved to play the lottery. He would scrape together a few spare dollars to buy a couple of lottery tickets. But one day in June 1997, he was sitting on his easy chair and looking at his quick pick tickets. He was holding a winning ticket and didn't even realize it. He didn't watch TV when they announced the winning numbers. He went to work the next day and overheard his coworkers talk about the jackpot. He ended up realizing that he won later that day. He won $31 million. Billy, a religious man, believed that God was on his side and his life was about to change forever. He was always told by friends and family that life will eventually get better for him, but as he said it himself, he didn't think it would get this better. He and his wife met with the legal financial specialist who encouraged them to put their money in a trust to avoid tax consequences and other financial issues. However, Billy declined to sign and return the document. Instead, Billy went to Austin, Texas a month later with an entourage that included his family, his minister, and his attorneys to collect the first of 25 annual checks for $1.24 million. Billy was ready to start spending. He bought a ranch and a half-dozen homes for himself and other relatives. He even purchased vehicles for his family and friends. He even donated tens of thousands of dollars to his church. Anytime someone needed financial help, they immediately went straight to Billy and asked him for money. Billy, being the kind-hearted man, would always give them the amount they asked for in cash. But things started to go down quickly. His friends, family members, fellow worshippers, sometimes people he didn't even know, were constantly asking him for money. He had to change his phone number several times after random people would call him asking him for money. He felt as if he had no friends since no one cared for him other than asking him for one thing. His out-of-control spending habit and generosity was starting to get to him, causing him to be frustrated. The whole thing caused tension in his marriage. He also made a bad deal with the company that gives lottery winners lump sum payments in exchange for their annual checks, which would result in him having less of what he actually won. Eventually his wife filed for divorce and he was left alone, and that was Billy's breaking point. On May 22, 1999, just 20 months after Billy had won the jackpot, he locked himself in his room, took his clothes off, and proceeded to point a shotgun to his chest and pulled the trigger. One of his sons had gone to his house and found him dead. Shortly before Billy passed, he confided to a financial advisor, "Winning the lottery is the worst thing that ever happened to me." In one of the notes that he left a message for his ex-wife saying, "I didn't want this. I just wanted you." Abraham Shakespeare was a 41-year-old man who worked odd jobs. He was mostly known as a part-time garbage worker in Lakeland, Florida. He lived with his mother, had no car, driver's license, or credit card. He grew up in Lake Wales, Florida, and had a long criminal record. He had been arrested for loitering, driving without a license, petty theft, fights, and failing to pay for child support. He had dropped out of the 7th grade and didn't know how to read or write. He always struggled financially and had to work multiple labor jobs just to pay his bills. But soon, that would all change. On November 15, 2006, Abraham was heading towards Miami with his coworker Michael Ford on an overnight food route. After 2 deliveries, they decided to stop at Town Star, a convenience store in Frostproof, Florida, because Michael wanted to buy cigarettes and drinks. Before heading inside, he asked Abraham if he wanted a soda. He told Michael that he wanted 2 lottery tickets. He then gave Michael $2 out of the 5 that he had on him that day. Michael then gets back into his truck and gives Abraham 2 quick picks. When Abraham saw the numbers on his ticket, it hits him. He had the winning numbers. Abraham had won the $30 million jackpot. He couldn't believe it, as he said that winning the lottery was a dream of his. He took his winnings in a lump sum of $17 million. After taxes, he got a total of $11 million. Abraham started to spend quickly, but before he could, the government took the child support he owed, which was almost $9,000. He then later puts $1 million in a trust fund for his son. Right after, he bought himself a 2006 F-150 pickup, a 2007 BMW, and a $1 million 2-garage home in a gated community. Having a lot of money left in his account, he started to feel generous. He started giving his money to family members. He gave each of his 3 stepsisters $250,000, $1 million to his stepfather, $40,000 to his brother's son's best friend, $12,000 to his mother, and $10,000 to his sister. Then friends and strangers got involved. He paid $185,000 off a mortgage for a friend, $60,000 off a mortgage for a man whose last name he didn't even know, and $53,000 off a mortgage for a man out of the neighborhood who he had been knowing for a few years. He also bought a $125,000 house near Lake Wells, Florida. He only saw his house once and later rented it to some tenants he only met once. Word started to spread quickly about Abraham's generosity. He's just giving away his money to just about anyone. He has even paid for funerals. Because of that, strangers, relatives, friends, just about anyone were starting to constantly ask him for money. A part of him knew that he was being taken advantage of, but he just had a hard time telling people no. Abraham just really loved to help people. But on April 2007, his former co-worker Michael Ford tried to sue Abraham, alleging that Abraham had stole his winning lottery ticket out of his wallet and said some of that money should be his. Ford wanted no less than $1 million. Abraham said that he never stole anything from him. On trial, Abraham came to court holding a garbage bag stuffed with thousands of lottery tickets he had purchased over the years. Fortunately, the jurors did side with Abraham, but the appeal process dragged on. Friends of Abraham had said that he was constantly frustrated with the constant appeals for money from both hangers-on and strangers. He had told his brother that he was better off being broke again. He also told one of his childhood friends that he's starting to realize that these people are not his friends. He said he thought they were, but now realized that all they ever cared about was getting money from him. One of those friends was Doris Donegan Moore. She also went by the name of Dee Dee. She runs a successful nurse staff agency near Lakeland. The two had met in October 2008. They became friends when Abraham went to an annual small business conference. Dee Dee met Barbara Jackson, who was Abraham's realtor who had sold him his house. Barbara told her about Abraham, and that's when she mentioned she wanted to help him manage his money. She also wanted to write a book about him, but that never happened. Instead, she made this home video of Abraham.
Tired of people asking you for money all the time, Abe? Give me your opinion on it.
I've been tired. A year ago.
So where you want to go to?
It don't matter to me. I'm not a picky person.
Are you going to miss your home?
Yep, I miss it, but life goes on.
This friendship was very odd to others. Abraham's former boss, Greg Smith, said he had doubts about her and that she didn't seem like a very genuine person. And he was far from wrong. You see, after the two knew each other for about 3 months, Dee Dee managed to transfer ownership of Abraham's home and had full control of his bank account. She had bought his $1 million home for $655,000. She also became the primary manager of Abraham Shakespeare LLC, taking over his affairs and buying the debts people owed him. This meant that the people who owed Shakespeare money, which was up to $600,000, would go directly to her, and Abraham wouldn't even receive a single penny. Days later, she then divorced her husband of 17 years. She used his money to give herself a nice vacation, a Hummer, a Corvette, and a truck. She said all of that money she got from Abraham was a gift to her. Dee Dee was known as a con artist by some people. She even had a criminal record as well. In 2001, Dee Dee was behind on car payments, so she drove out and parked her car in a garage and got an accomplice to tie her up and take her to Waimama, Florida. There she was thrown in a ditch and cried out for help until someone nearby stopped to help her. Dee Dee told the passerby that she had been raped at gunpoint by 3 Hispanic men and stole her vehicle. She was convicted of insurance fraud and falsely reporting a crime. She served 1 year of probation. The following year in 2002, she filed for bankruptcy. On November 9, 2009, Shakespeare was reported missing by his family. They said they haven't seen him since April of that year. His friends and family thought he had probably taken the rest of his money and was now living on a beach in the Caribbean Sea. But they haven't heard from him at all. They started placing signs with his picture and information around town, including Abraham's old regular hangout. Authorities received many tips from people, but they said none led to him. They said that if he's really out there hiding, wanting to stay away from people, that's fine, but they want to make sure that he is physically okay. The authorities did find this whole disappearance suspicious and believed something bad had happened to him. They had doubts that he ran off hiding. Someone did come forward and told the police this: "Only thing I know is that's my best friend. Y'all need to go ask that white woman where that man at." That woman being Dee Dee. Dee Dee had told the Ledger newspaper in Lakeland that she helped Abraham disappear. She said that's what he wanted because he was falling behind on child support again. According to her, Abraham told her that he was tired of people continuing to bug him for money that he no longer had. He intentionally didn't want to be found and didn't care what it took. Police were starting to pay attention to Dee Dee as she was the last person to see Abraham, and that she kept changing some details in her story. She would tell people that Abraham went to Texas, Miami, a cruise, and that he's out in Haiti helping people, and that he couldn't come back because of a supposed earthquake that happened there. The stories kept on changing and couldn't stay consistent. The police had checked her home, her Hummer, and her hard drive, but nothing was found. Dee Dee was pretty confident and told detectives that she's innocent. She even said, "I'm not going to be O.J. Simpson and run." She then starts to cry to Greg Smith because she says everyone thinks she had done something to Abraham, and then she makes a very odd request. She asked Greg if he could call Abraham's mother and say that he's okay. Greg was confused as to what she meant, but she made it clear, telling him, "I want you to pretend to be Abraham." She said she would pay him $300 if he makes the phone call. Greg surprisingly agrees. Dee Dee told Abraham's mom to check her phone because her son is about to call her. Greg calls and Abraham's mom immediately answered. However, his mom was suspicious when she first heard Greg talking. She was asking who it was, but Greg said that it's me, your son, and that he sounded different because he had a cold. Surprisingly, she buys it. Greg told her to tell the police that he's alive and well. Greg starts to think that maybe Dee Dee didn't do anything to Abraham and started to believe her story that he just ran off on his own. But as time passes, Greg starts to have his doubts again. He decided to call Abraham himself and left a voicemail to call him back. That's when he got a text message that read, "I'll call you in a little while." Greg knew immediately that it wasn't Abraham that texted him. Remember, he can't read, write, let alone know how to text. So for Greg to get a text message without any spelling errors from Abraham, Greg knew without a doubt that it wasn't Abraham who sent that text. He wasn't the only one who got a text from Abraham's number. She would text relatives of his pretending to be Abraham to make his family think that he was okay. But despite Abraham not knowing how to text, his relatives did say that the messages sounded nothing like him. When they would message Dee Dee questions that only Abraham would know, she wouldn't respond, and that raised even more suspicion. The police had Dee Dee on their radar, but now they have Greg on their radar as well. Police were aware of the call that he made to Abraham's mother and the $300 he got from Dee Dee. The cops had met up with Greg and Greg was scared at first, but the police asked him for help because Dee Dee was their prime suspect. Greg didn't hesitate. Abraham was his best friend who helped them out get out of debt, so he agreed to be an undercover. They wanted Greg to wire up and meet up with Dee Dee, but he was nervous as the last time the two met up, Dee Dee was touching all over his body, lifting his shirt, asking if he's wired up. Instead, Greg came up with a better idea. He decided to put a microphone in a Red Bull can and place it on his cup holder in his car. He casually drank Red Bulls and smoked cigarettes. He would use the empty cans as an ashtray, so all of this wouldn't seem suspicious to Dee Dee whatsoever. This ended up working.
I only been talking to you because I'm trying to find Abraham.
Exactly. Well, hey, I'm all in, baby.
I feel like if Abraham was okay, he would contact me by now because he transferred all that stuff into my name, and then he was supposed to leave and, not come back for a while.
Dee Dee was feeling pressured, constantly being questioned by the media and the police. She even told Greg about a supposed drug dealer named Ronald, and that this Ronald person had probably killed Abraham. Greg asked her what his last name was, and she said she didn't know. Greg had a feeling that this Ronald person most likely didn't exist and was making someone up from the top of her head. She then brings up that she's looking for someone to possibly take the blame and admit that they murdered Abraham. Greg said that he may know someone that would take the blame. Later, when Greg notified the police about her plan, the police got a cop to go undercover to play the part of someone who's going to admit the murder of Abraham.
And then, what do you want?
50 grand.
Can I do it in payments? Because I don't have that kind of cash. I'm going to have to sell something.
I'm gonna need 10 up front. Once I do this, make sure my boy get the money.
Okay.
See, what I'll do is I'll get it and give it to his mama.
So the undercover agrees with the deal as long as his family gets the $50,000, and Dee Dee agrees. The undercover asked Dee Dee that he would need something to be able to prove that he's responsible for Abraham's death. But while all of this was going down, Greg was starting to break on the inside because this confirmed to him that Abraham is dead, but he remains calm in the meetup so Dee Dee doesn't get suspicious. Greg asked Dee Dee if she or knows someone who has the murder weapon so they could give it to him so they can try to pin it back to the undercover, and Greg was surprised when she gave him the murder weapon. It was a Smith & Wesson .38 Special. The police were able to find receipts of her purchasing at a gun shop and was seen training and using the firearm at the local gun shop range. Now, there's just one more thing left. She's about to take Greg where the body is. Dee Dee takes them to one of the properties she owned in nearby Plant City, Florida. From her truck, she points out a big fresh slab of concrete in her yard. Greg told her that he didn't want the two to be seen out of the truck, so he asked her if she can take the rebar iron that was in her vehicle and drop it where Abraham was buried. She does it, and on that same day, Greg tipped the police where Abraham's body was. On February 2nd, 2010, police went to the spot where Dee Dee had pointed where Abraham's body was. On the same day, while the police were trying to recover the body, the media was able to talk to Dee Dee to hear what she had to say.
Michelle? Well, today law enforcement released the cause of death for Abraham Shakespeare, and they kept it very short. They called it homicidal violence. But in an interview right outside her home, Dee Dee Moore did not keep things short. She was actually very talkative.
Because the media will not leave, and this is an intrusion on all my neighbors, and they don't deserve any of this.
Dee Dee Moore started with one message, but quickly shifted gears when asked about the murder of Abraham Shakespeare.
Because I have never hurt that man. He knows everyone knows I would never hurt that man in any way.
Did you murder Abraham Shakespeare?
Absolutely not. And
Dee Dee, you indicated you know who pulled the trigger.
I have given all the information to the Sheriff's Department.
The Sheriff's Department found Shakespeare's body at her boyfriend's house, buried under a concrete slab. How did Shakespeare die? Shot in the head, according to Dee Dee Moore.
They already discussed everything with me.
What did they say? He was shot in the head?
Yeah. Do you want to shut the cameras off now?
Dee Dee made it clear she knows more than she can say, that she's scared, and she knows why she's considered a person of interest.
With the situation and how it went down, I wouldn't believe myself. I would say, lock her up. I would, but there's always two sides to every story. There's always more to any situation. God up above knows I didn't shoot that man, and that is the only person I have to answer to.
In the end, Dee Dee Moore said she felt like the money that Abraham won was a curse to him and a curse to her. Live in Polk County, Michelle Meredith, West 2 News.
Police believe that Abraham was killed between the 6th or 7th of April 2009. His cousin Cedric was the last person to see him alive, which was on April 3rd. Later that night, Dee Dee was finally arrested. While in handcuffs, she told the police that she hopes that they find the true killer, which the cop responded with, "I got one on my hands right now." Abraham was shot twice in the chest. Police believe that the two got in some type of disagreement over his money, causing Dee Dee to get mad and kill them. She was able to bury his body by telling her ex-husband, who worked with the fill dirt company, to dig a hole using his company's tools. Her excuse was that she needed a pit to burn trash. Her ex-husband was unknowingly digging Abraham's grave. Then she hired a contractor to fill the hole with concrete and said it was so she could park her boats and vehicles. When Dee Dee was being interrogated by detectives, she was blaming everyone but herself. She first blamed that it was Abraham's cousin Cedric, who was the last person to see Abraham. She then went on to blame her son, who was 14 years old at the time, that he grabbed her gun and killed Abraham at her office. Police weren't buying any of this and were well aware of her stories constantly changing anytime they presented loopholes in her stories, as well as evidence proving why her claims are false. Greg would later testify against her, and Dee Dee would now point the finger at him that Greg was the one who killed Abraham, and her reasoning was because Abraham was sleeping with Greg's wife, so he killed Abraham out of anger. Abraham's mother had came forward and testified against her as well. She said that during the time that the police were searching for Abraham's body, Dee Dee offered her $5,000 if she could write a birthday card and tell police it was given to her by Abraham. She even offered his two kids a $200,000 home if they told police they saw their dad recently. During the trial, Dee Dee would have to listen to her interrogation.
Listening in on private conversations and know a lot more than she ever thought.
It's the bottom of the ninth, and you've got 2 strikes, Dee Dee. Okay?
I watched Cedric shoot him. I was in the room.
The one and only objective in this interrogation with Dee Dee Moore was to get the truth on what happened to Abraham Shakespeare. Moore started with this theory.
It was a drug deal that went bad, and the guy's name is something. I just found it out.
Moore could not think of the drug dealer's name who supposedly killed Shakespeare, but with some persistence from detectives, it wasn't long before she scratched that idea and moved on to a new one.
But I'm telling you, Cedric took the gun and in cold blood did not even hesitate to shoot the man, and I seen it happen.
Cedric is Shakespeare's cousin, who actually reported him missing back in the fall of 2009. As she watched it all in court, tears flowed. One heated moment came when she claimed she was being framed.
Look at all the stuff you did, Dee Dee. Look at all the stuff you've done. If there's ever been some kind of cover-up, you did it on this case.
I had to.
Just when it looked like that was the end of the lies, the detective testified she had one more statement as she broke down and left the interrogation room.
She said, my son RJ shot Abraham twice. Abraham was trying to choke me. RJ walked in the room, grabbed my gun, and shot him. He was only protecting me like any son would do.
Now, throughout this trial, the defense claims Moore was set up to make it look like she killed Shakespeare. So here's the big question here. Will Dee Dee Moore take the stand in her own trial? Her attorneys say they are still considering it, and they will have the weekend to make up their minds. Live in Tampa, Ryan Raish, ABC Action News.
Good evening. Well, deputies suggested that Moore was a pathological liar and that every time they asked her where Shakespeare was, she would create an elaborate fairy tale to mislead investigators.
Dee Dee Moore was treated in the jail infirmary after she complained about pain from her leg restraints.
I had an anaphylactic, sorry my tongue, I had an anaphylactic shock.
Once cleared by a doctor, the trial continued with video of hours of questioning by Polk County investigators.
Do I think that you're a cold-blooded killer? No, I hope you're not a cold-blooded killer.
I have not killed him.
I hope he's not even dead.
He's not.
Moore gave a wide variety of excuses why Abraham Shakespeare disappeared.
Because he wanted to pretend he was dying of AIDS so that he doesn't have to pay child support and people won't look for him if he's dying of AIDS.
Then there was the blackmail excuse.
It was a videotape of him having sex with a 14-year-old girl.
Then came the tears.
My family's being affected. My mom's got heart problems. She's over my house right now cleaning for Thanksgiving. My own parents were scared to come to my house for Thanksgiving.
Why?
because of all this stuff happening.
Well, how do they know about all this stuff?
Because I'm honest with my family.
But detectives didn't believe Moore was honest at all.
I honestly can't look at you and believe a word that's come out of your mouth. You have lied and lied and lied.
One detective told the jury Moore even made a pass at him after the interrogation.
She actually came toward me and she said that I wasn't going to get angry, that I was going to have sex with her. She said she was very attracted to me and hoped once her name was clear that I would pursue a relationship with her.
And Moore said that there was proof that Shakespeare was alive at the time he disappeared because of a cell phone call that was made from his phone to her phone. However, deputies pointed out that both those calls pinged off the same cell phone tower, suggesting that Moore made that phone call to herself. We're live in downtown Tampa. Chris Frankman, ABC Action News.
She also chose to not testify, and her attorney argued that there is no proof that she killed Abraham and no witness to say she admitted to actually killing him or participating in helping someone else in the killing. But the prosecutor countered the argument by reminding everyone that his body was on her property and he was killed by the gun she owned. Someone in the courtroom got kicked out, and that person happened to be a supporter of Dee Dee. The two met in jail and are friends. She regularly visits Dee Dee. In the end, on December 10, 2012, Dee Dee was convicted of first-degree murder, and she was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole.
Handed down their verdict, Moore is guilty of killing Abraham Shakespeare to get and keep his lottery winnings. Allison Morrow joins us now with why Abraham Shakespeare's family was so sure they would get justice. Good evening, Allison.
Good evening, Brendan. That is because they say they knew Moore was guilty all along, but the harshest words did not come from Shakespeare's family. They came from the judge.
State of Florida versus Doris Donegan Moore.
Stone-faced, unlike past tears or smiles.
The defendant is guilty of first-degree murder.
Dee Dee Moore simply shook her head no, while her victim's family nodded yes.
She had everything she wanted, and she still didn't have enough, and she took his life.
Jurors took 3 hours and 16 minutes to decide whether Moore planned to kill Abraham Shakespeare, once a lottery winner who deposited $13 million into a bank account. Witnesses say Moore stripped bare before killing him.
And this person that did this, you're going to be able to have a lifetime to think about.
But family members saved their words for outside the courtroom. It was Judge Emmett Battles who spoke directly to Moore, a woman he scolded several times for her emotional outbursts.
Cold, calculated, cruel, they all apply. Manipulative, probably the most manipulative person that this court has seen. Abraham Shakespeare was your prey and your victim. Money was the root of the evil that you brought to Abraham.
And with that, he sentenced Moore to life in prison without parole.
If we're going to carry on, life must go on, one way or the other.
In 2019, she sends a letter to the court apologizing. "I'm truly sorry to the prosecutor, Abraham's mom, and others that I have hurt for not being truthful. I regret my actions." The day after she was convicted of first-degree murder, Abraham's mother has said that she forgives her for what she has done. It was at this point that it seemed like Dee Dee had finally realized what she had done and wanted to change the best she could. But then she takes it back and says that she isn't the killer and goes back to pointing the finger at Greg. She later gets upset that no witness had came forward to back up her claims and blaming her attorneys for not calling them. No one knows who this witness is. People believe it's just another made-up person. The witness is probably as real as the Ronald man she had mentioned before. So with that being said, she blames her attorneys for the outcome of her case and now says she deserves to be granted a new trial. But Anthony Rickman, a legal analyst, says that her getting a new trial is unlikely and that the letter she wrote could hurt her because she admitted to perjury. She still claims to be innocent to this day, saying she doesn't know who the killer is, but then she would change her mind to say that she does know who the killer is, which she would point at everyone but herself. Dee Dee was a con artist for many years and has tried every trick in the book taking advantage of others, and even now she thinks she can manipulate the system with tears and different excuses that she could come up with. Luckily, no one is buying her stories and excuses as they're never consistent. All 4 lottery winners mentioned in this video were people with good hearts as they were generous with their money. Both Billie and Abraham giving their money away to just about anyone who simply asked. Craigory, who spent time buying Christmas gifts for those in need, and Urooj, who had plans to help others with his money but suddenly passed before he could even receive it. You may ask, why didn't they try to remain anonymous? It's not that simple. You see, only 11 states in the US allow you to remain anonymous if you want. 3 out of the 4 mentioned in this video were living in states that didn't allow you to be anonymous. Georgia does allow winners to remain anonymous, but I assume Craigory didn't want to. He's the one who took the picture of the check and posted it online himself. However, for Billie, who lived in Texas, didn't have that option. Texas didn't allow anonymity for lottery winners until October 2017. Winning the lottery is a dream for most people, but these cases show that they can be a nightmare as well. These people did nothing wrong and tried their best to change the life of others. In the end, they only became a target by greedy people. If you ever win the lottery, remain anonymous if you can. If not, your best bet is to hire a lawyer and remember to keep a low profile. Be careful on who you tell about your winnings. You never know who may be after you for your money. So if you win the lottery, think twice on who you trust.